The Legend of Zelda series can be considered one of the most consistent gaming franchises of all time, delivering exceptional titles that tend to top the review charts time and time again. However, there still are a select few of these games that don't quite meet this quality standard, and are often disregarded by the general fanbase. One of the most prime examples of this being Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link. This 1987 sequel to the critically acclaimed Legend of Zelda strayed away from the classic top-down gameplay in favor of a side-scrolling style that's more reminiscent of games like Metroid and Castlevania, complete with many classic role-playing elements like an experience point system and random encounters. Although the reception of this game wasn't actually all that bad at launch, the experience really hasn't aged very well, as its break of conventions and abrupt difficulty caused many fans to eventually disregard this game as the black sheep of the franchise. In order to figure out exactly why this is, I have decided to invite my good friend Hyrule Gamer to join me in analyzing the design and flaws of this game to figure out exactly why it is considered to be a failure.
Whenever most people start a conversation about Zelda 2, one of the major talking points that always seems to surface is the game's insane difficulty. Now, there is nothing objectively wrong with a difficult game, but the problem with Zelda 2 is that most of its difficulty doesn't come from lack of skill, but rather from completely unfair measures, such as a lack of a decent checkpoint system and various roadblocks that constantly throttle a player's progression. Most notably, the game's unfair combat system tends to be the main thing that strays most players away from enjoying this game. For starters, just about every enemy in this game has a completely randomized attack pattern, and you are often given little to no reaction time when trying to dodge or block an enemy's attack. This wouldn't be too bad if hard enemies like this are rare, and are only encountered one at a time, but oftentimes the game is quick to swarm the player with multiple enemies at once, which leads to these frantic button mashing battles that never really end up too well in the player's favour. There is simply just too much activity on the screen at one time for a player to comprehend every attack that is being thrown at them, and even a very experienced player can sometimes find it hard to escape these battles without at least losing a good portion of their life, which, mind you, is very hard to come by in this game. Because of this, death is very common in Zelda 2, and the player will often experience dozen upon dozens of deaths in just a single chapter of this game.
With how common it is for a player to die in this game, you would think that there would be a generous checkpoint system in place to get the player right back into action. But this is not the case at all, because when you do happen to die, you have to start all the way back from the first world spawn points. This means that every single death is usually followed by a 5 to 10 minute travel session to get back where you left off, only to die a few minutes later by an unexpected swarm of difficult enemies. This causes the game's progression to feel rather choppy, and considering how far away some of the late game palaces are from the world spawn, the backtracking can get so drawn out and tedious to the point that most players tend to quit playing very early on in the game. What would make this a lot more fair is if checkpoints were placed at the beginning of palaces and towns to avoid these long, unnecessary hauls back, as the non-inclusion of proper checkpoints in this game feels more like a way to pad its length than anything.
Moving on, another one of the big gripes that a lot of people don't like about this game is how poorly it handles its overworld design. Unlike the side-scrolling nature of the game's palaces and caves, the overworld is presented in a top-down format, and is used to travel between the side-scrolling areas. In theory, this isn't that bad of a concept, but what most people don't seem to like is the unpredictable nature of this overworld, with its random enemy encounters and other unprecedented jumps to 2D sections. Most can agree that this gives the world a rather inconsistent feel, but I think the biggest gripe about this game's overworld is how the game uses it to hide many critical items from the player in a rather unfair manner.
For an example, there is a bridge keeper in the town of Saria who won't let you pass unless you have acquired a specific letter to show him, but you are not given any sort of clues to where this letter can be found. The solution to this is by exiting the town and walking over to this exact tile in the overworld to be transported to a 2D section where the letter resides in. But the problem is, how exactly was the player supposed to know that this one specific tile would trigger this event, when it just looks like any other forest tile in the game? These kind of things plague the world of Zelda 2, and the only viable solution is to literally walk over every single tile in the overworld, hoping that you find the next secret to progress. On top of this, with how frequent and unavoidable random encounters are in the overworld, you are bound to run into dozens of these enemy sections while just searching over a small area of the map. padding out the experience even further.
Many more of these progressive brick walls can be found just about everywhere in Zelda 2, as there are many times where a player might explore through a lengthy cave system or palace just to realize that at the very end, they need a specific item to progress that was just hidden away in a past segment of the game. Considering how hard the combat is in these 2D segments, the player more than likely wasted a lot of time and lives trying to get through it just to realize that it was all for nothing, and they must now backtrack through it all to find the item that they need, which could exist anywhere within the world, literally anywhere. Keeping all of this in mind, you only spend about 20% of your total time in this game actually progressing through it, while on the other hand, 80% of it is composed by either tediously rummaging through the overworld to find the required items, or backtracking through it to resume to where you left off after a death. This extreme padding and difficulty is the reason why the game is hated by so many even to this day. So it makes sense why the majority of the Zelda fanbase feels so negatively about this game.
However, there is one bright side to all of this, and that is that most of the game's flaws are easily fixable. Earlier on, we talked about how adding checkpoints to the palaces and villages would remove a lot of the unnecessary backtracking, but there are also many other minor fixes that could be implemented to improve the experience as well. For starters, making sure that every single interactable tile in the overworld is distinguishable from the rest would remove the need to tediously search over it. Blocking the player from entering a dungeon or cave until they possess all the tools necessary to complete it will prevent the player from hitting a brick wall midway through, and adjusting the combat difficulty, especially in the beginning chapters, will actually give the game a nice progressive flow, rather than just feeling like a Kaizo run from start to end. With all these important changes factored in, you would actually have a really solid game on your hands. But unfortunately, as it stands, these flaws are majorly holding the game back from achieving its fullest potential. This is really unfortunate, considering that Zelda 2 has some really unique game mechanics such as an experience point system and game-altering magic spells that I thought were both very cool, but were completely overshadowed by the general poor reception of this game. This is why I am really hoping that Nintendo remakes this game in the future with all these changes in mind, and if done so correctly, I honestly think that this game could become one of the strongest 2D Zelda titles out there. But as it stands right now, Zelda 2's experience is way too unfair and padded to be enjoyable in its current state, and that is why many consider it to be the weakest Zelda game to date. Anyways, what do you guys think about this game? Is Zelda 2 also your least favorite Zelda game, or is there another one that holds that title? Feel free to let me know down in the comments below. Also, a huge shout out to Hyrule Gamer for helping me with this video. We have also made a video on his channel talking about another one of the series' most controversial games, Phantom Hourglass. I'll leave a link to that video down in the description below. In the meantime, if you could drop a like on this video and subscribe here as well, that would help support my content immensely. And finally, a huge shout out to my amazing Patrons and YouTube members who help support the channel. I'll leave a link down in the description below if you would like to help me out here as well. Anyways, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.